Bitcoin is a commodity, and there's two reasons for this. So we can talk about the consequences of ideal money, especially, better supply chain. We're not going to have long-term contracts falling apart. Okay, so Tether's crypto, cool. But for the most part, crypto is just noise. Keep in mind that reference that I got on the Big Bang that he told Shapley comes out of a book, A Beautiful Mind, which the movie was based on that, right? And at that time, Bitcoin didn't exist when that book was written. How do you make the connection that the Big Bang is going to become Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin, the word didn't even exist. As you know, I believe that John Nash was Satoshi Nakamoto. I think when you understand that Bitcoin is ideal money and Bitcoin is asymptotically ideal money, meaning inflation rate is approaching zero. Okay, if Nash is the creator of Bitcoin, who was his mentor? What was he teaching?
Before we get started with all the topics, maybe give us some overview of who you are and especially why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Well, Bryan Solsten, I've been into Bitcoin since 2017. I really was excited about the cryptography, proving it out, proving it out with the money to me was like, wow, this is great. That means there's no backdoors. As a privacy advocate, that was exciting. I kind of missed, early 2009 Bitcoin. I should have stayed with, that PGP, pretty good program or whatever it stood for. That was early cryptography. How Finney worked for Zimmerman, and how Finney was an early adopter. I was in aerospace, and if you know anything about aerospace, you can get lost in your cubicle and just work like crazy. And that's what I did for many years. And so I just kind of lost touch. So yeah, 2017, there's a few touch points, but then I'm like, wow, this hasn't been broken yet. This is amazing. This is amazing cryptography. And so, yeah, I went all in at that point.
Yeah, it's kind of magical that this thing worked. Like when you think about the Bitcoin history and what happened before 2009, but then from 2009 onwards also, all the small breaking points where Bitcoin could be broken, or it could that there could have been something wrong with it, and it stood above everything. For me, the big point is always the block size war, like the last test, really, like to show how resilient the network really is. But there was like before that already some proving points, and it's just magical that this whole thing works out and there's no central authority that really pushes that.
Yeah, and there's one narrative out there, let's call it the gold bug narrative, and we've been hearing for 40 years, the U.S. government's going to go bankrupt, and hell, it's all going to break loose within 3 or 4 months. I mean, we even hear that within the Bitcoin community. The truth is, fiat is more resilient than that. I think, like I just recently listened to a Ray Dalio book, his most recent one that came out, audiobook, when I was on a road trip. And, he doesn't have the hysterics that some of the people have, some of the, let's say, gold bug turned Bitcoiner people in our community. It's more of a measured, we're in a large debt super cycle, but it's not going to, we're not going to go hyper Bitcoinization in the next 3 or 4 months. We are going through a transition. And I believe in that, but I never really bought into the gold bug narrative. I felt like, I don't know, that wasn't my angle. But since I've become a Bitcoiner, I have learned to appreciate the gold bug narrative. I have a much greater appreciation for it now.
Yeah, I was very opposed to gold when I first got into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin kind of warmed me up to the idea what gold actually is and what value it holds. So I didn't like, there are a lot of gold bugs that come to Bitcoin actually because they see, that has a lot of the same properties that gold has. I kind of came to the realization with Bitcoin that gold has some value. I mean, it's the most valuable asset on earth currently. Of course, it has value, but I never understood it before Bitcoin. Like I need it because maybe I'm young, maybe I'm digital native. Maybe that's why I needed the digital thing first to get the physical properties. And for other people, it might be the different way.
Yeah, the gold bug narrative is good, and let me explain why I appreciate it better now. I have tried to, let's say, evangelize Bitcoin many times with many conversations over the years, and generally speaking, I've been unsuccessful. Um, and I think that lately I've been much more successful. Like when I was in El Salvador, I could, orange pill people easily because it was a topic down there. But around here in the United States, it's not as easy. But I've learned that when I'm having casual conversation, if I talk about the problem, if I talk about the broken money, about, wages being debased, those kind of issues, people understand. So I think before talking about the solution, before talking about what Bitcoin is, if you talk about the problem, that's kind of like junk food conversation. People eat it up. They understand it. And you don't even need to talk about Bitcoin. If it comes up, cool. But if not, I think that's the aspect of the gold bug narrative that I really like. And it is the Bitcoin narrative too. Bitcoin really is about fixing broken money. And more than that, since we talked, Robin, I went back to the University of Chicago because, as you know, I believe that John Nash was Satoshi Nakamoto. And for my own personal education, I really wanted to understand the pedigree. Nash had an elite education at Carnegie. I mean, he was a teenager when he went to Carnegie and got his master's, and then he went on to get his PhD. And before he turned 22 at Princeton, he got his doctorate. And this guy truly had an elite education, and it was not only in game theory, but he was surrounded with the best cryptographers in the world at that time. They had broken the Japanese code in World War II. They were there at Princeton, and those were his buddies. So he rolled in after World War II. And so I really wanted to understand the pedigree of, where did he get this education? Because he only took one international economics course and won a Nobel Prize in this. And so I learned that Bert Hoslitz was his teacher at Carnegie. And then I was like, wow, he has an archive. His work is archived at the University of Chicago, where he taught economics and also social, what was it? I always get that wrong. Social science. And he also taught economics there. He really tied the two together in some ways that, in some ways, the way Austrians believe that you have to have good money before you can have good society and good civilization, right? Otherwise things break down. And Hoslitz wasn't at that level, but he was very much in parallel with that. He really believed strongly in the good money and also society, and but he was more into good education and so on in development. But one thing that I learned a lot about the pedigree of Bitcoin by really pursuing, for my own personal education reasons, of okay, if Nash is the creator of Bitcoin, who was his mentor? What was he teaching? And what was the education about economics before all this noise happened, especially with the Fed and all this funny money? What were they really talking about teaching at these high level elite educational systems? What was it that he learned that set him on this course, Nash, to do the Nash equilibrium, to write non-cooperative games in 1950 and win a Nobel Prize? That's why I went to the University of Chicago, and I spent a couple days there. And they had this egg-shaped glass building, and below the ground level, they had all these archives that could automatically retrieve and return these boxes. And I went over into the next building, and you sit kind of in this glass room, and there's three ladies there that watch you, and they give you one box at a time. You can request. It takes about a half hour for them to get it out of the archive. And then you only allowed to take one folder out of the box at a time, and you can just read. And so for about 2 days, I just went through Bert Hoslitz's work and really learned about what he was passionate about. And it translates directly into non-cooperative games. And this was really, it goes back all the way back to 1928. of wanting one currency. The math in 1944 of doing equilibrium, and this was the pedigree that set Nash. He only took one course and then one course in economics and wins the Nobel Prize. Nash was amazing mathematically, and he took these different mathematical methods, and he abstracted them, he generalized them into a few axioms and theorems, and created the Nash equilibrium.
It's super interesting, and maybe, I mean, you already gave some background to John Nash, but I think for most people, it would be great to have some background of like who he is and what is kind of like the things that he is done in general. Like you already explained some of them, but maybe we can give like a general overview of like who John Nash was. I think it would probably be good for the rest of the pod.
Yeah, most people know John Nash as that person in A Beautiful Mind. When he went through 25 years of illness, he was paranoid schizophrenia. And the book A Beautiful Mind really focused on his illness, and the movie did too. And the movie made it into, they fictionalized a lot of the scenes too. And so when I learn about, I mean, I love that movie. I saw A Beautiful Mind, and I thought it was amazing. And then I watched it, fairly recently, like a year ago. And I thought it was a little bit cringy, or a little bit cringe, because it was just so focused on his illness, and it really inflated that. It really disregarded many of his accomplishments in his life before his illness. He was a genius. He had 25 years of schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia. And then he recovered, and his recovery was more than noteworthy. He continued his work. In fact, he was doing his work even during those 25 years. He was, alone. He was the lone genius on the blackboard, just doing his work all by himself and obsessing. And the guy was a computer.
It's the kind of person that if we would, even if you don't believe that John Nash is Satoshi Nakamoto, it's the kind of person you think that Satoshi Nakamoto might describe, like the lone genius that, like Satoshi Nakamoto probably isn't the general mainstream guy that you know from the guy from your neighborhood. So it's really interesting to think about that. And you also, and I want to get late in the episode because we had already an episode where we touched on the theory a little bit. So we got a community question that we kind of can tackle it today a little bit, but maybe we start with the how John Nash is kind of changing the Bitcoin narrative, and how you look at that.
Yeah, it greatly simplifies the narrative. I think when you understand that Bitcoin is ideal money, and Bitcoin is asymptotically ideal money, meaning that the inflation rate is approaching zero, or the coin issuance is approaching zero, and it's going to be snipped off, and no more Bitcoin is going to be created, and then it will be ideal money. When you understand what ideal money is, and that all it is a ledger that doesn't debase the units, it's really simple. And if you look at all these other crypto things that are going on, there's meandering narratives all over the place. And let's face it, some of our Bitcoin friends, they get caught up with some of these NFTs and think that Bitcoin needs to do that kind of stuff too. It doesn't. It needs to stay focused on the original intent of what Bitcoin is, and that is ideal money, nothing more. If we stay focused on that, that's the big prize. And now, if we think about all the implications of that, it's almost endless. The complexity of having ideal money and stopping the theft is extraordinary, and that's highly complex. So we can talk about the consequences of ideal money, especially, better supply chain. We're not going to have long-term contracts falling apart. Those kind of efficiencies are beyond our comprehension. And so they compound, progress compounds on itself when we can really have a foundation of ideal money. The kind of civilization of society that will emerge from that is something that is going to have consequences that are great, very complex, that we can't fully understand.
Why do you actually call it ideal money and not like sound money? Is there like, is it just the word difference, or is there like an actual difference for you what ideal money versus sound money means?
Well, that's good. That's a very good question. Keep in mind that after his recovery in, what was it, 1983, his first big publication I recall was 2002, Ideal Money. And my interpretation was it's going to be this global money. It's going to have an index. We're going to have cooperation because there's so many benefits if we can just have one currency. In fact, back in 1928, in Bert Hoslett's archive, he has a book, and the first chapter is talking about how Illinois and New York have the same currency, but when you have different countries, they have different currencies, and this makes things much more complex. Now, let me digress just a little bit here. This is important, Robin. Right after that 1928 book, he has a 1944 course that he takes in economics where he's doing all the math to find the equilibrium between two countries so that they can figure out their trade to get to parity or equilibrium. And so they can have standard value, or what Nash would call standard measurement of value. And so the U.S. would go into these negotiations, and they'd already figure it out. And they say, hey, for us to have equilibrium, we need to have this kind of trade agreement, and it's going to be mutually beneficial and get it done. It's not like, Trump going in and, hey, I'm tough and we're going to negotiate and I'm the art of the deal. No, it wasn't like that. Back then, University of Chicago had experts trained in mathematics to figure out these equilibrium, the parity, and they would go in and say, this is what we need to find that equilibrium. Now, let's get back to this ideal money. Why do I call that ideal money? Is because Nash published a book on ideal money in 2002. And part of his recovery, by the way, in 1983 and thereafter, was he gave up on politics and he gave up on religion, and he devoted himself to technology. And he attributed that to his recovery from paranoid schizophrenia. A lot of this, let's put it in other terms, all these delusions that he had, he was able to, let's say, figure out, okay, these are delusions and this is reality. And so he went after this ideal money, but as soon as he published it, every time he lectured, he was talking about asymptotically ideal money. Now, this is my interpretation. This isn't Nash's, but I think he would agree with me. He died in 2015, but I think he would agree with me on this, is that his ideal money was really a centralized method of, okay, we're going to get cooperations between the international community because we're going to have so many benefits. But he was cynical at that point in 2002. He knew it would never happen because when it comes to these centralized forces, they are corrupt and they're not going to give up that power. He knew that in 2002. And that was part of his, let's say, reasonable paranoia, or part of his paranoid illness, or maybe it was both. But asymptotically ideal money is decentralized. That's the difference. And so, he published in 2002 of ideal money. It's like, okay, we can't get there through just cooperation and talking about it. We're going to have to play some non-cooperative games. And that's the paper he published in 1950. And so he devised, using game theory, Bitcoin, that would asymptotically provide ideal money. And what is ideal money? It's just an honest ledger. That's all. A ledger that doesn't debase the units. No big deal. Okay, now we all understand what Bitcoin is, but what are the implications of that? And none of us are going to fully understand it until it becomes ideal money. And then it's just going to be black and white at that point. Everyone will say, well, why didn't we do this earlier? It's because there are centralized powers that will not give up the printing money out of thin air. And these when we talk about deep state, it's the banks. Okay, it's the significantly important banks. It's the Jamie Dimons. It's other banks. This is deep state. They have immense power. They are the king makers in the world. They fund. They pick and choose who's going to become, these leaders of even democracies.
That's and the implications of ideal money and endosound money. It's super interesting because I talk a lot about Bitcoin on this podcast, and it's very clear to me that we will come to that future, that it will happen over time. But then the question is, what does this actually mean? And it's like an impossible question to answer. And I have heard many different answers to that. And I'm just very excited about the implications of that and seeing how it actually plays out, because we are now at if the adoption numbers are always skewed, but if we say we are at 3% adoption rate, I think that's massively overdone, that number, because we count everyone that has like $1,000 on Coinbase in Bitcoin. I don't know if we can call that adoption already. So the real numbers are probably like under 1% still. So we have no clue what the implications of mainstream adoption of Bitcoin will be, just because we are nowhere near any sort of mainstream adoption. We're a very small bubble. Everyone will agree with that if they are walking out on the street and asking 200 people what the difficulty adjustment on Bitcoin is. You are lucky if you find one good answer in a different crowd.
Look at me at 1971. I had no idea what was going to become of the U.S. dollar. No idea whatsoever. But looking back on it, it's clearly eviscerated the middle class. It's taken the poor and pushed them out into becoming homeless, because the price of homes have become so expensive. People understood this a long time ago. John Locke understood this stuff. He was fighting with mercantilists. What was it? Sir Child. I can't remember. But people understood, fake money. They understood that if you start printing more units, it's going to create inflation. It causes a lot of problems. Now here we are. 1971 was a long time ago. We know what the problems are, and so we can kind of look back on what was life like before 1971. And you could have one breadwinner in a family working and own a home and a car and pay for college. And, we're just not anywhere near that now because of the centralization of wealth. And so ideal money, the implication of that is vast. And we can talk about that a lot. But really, the narrative of Bitcoin is simple. It's a ledger. It's an honest ledger. It's ideal money. It's not this meandering narrative that you hear with all this crypto noise. It's the ideal money. The John Nash narrative obliterates all this crypto nonsense. Stable coins are really cool, and I dig Tether, but this is just a stepping stone to where we're really going. Okay, Tether's not the end goal. We're talking about asymptotically ideal money, and it's going to help us get there. But, okay, so Tether's crypto, cool. But for the most part, crypto is just noise. And by the way, I want to bring up a very important point here. Bitcoin is a commodity, and there's two reasons for this. Bitcoin is a commodity because you have digital decentralized transactions, right? Without an intermediary. We understand that. But in the white paper, there's another point here, and Jack missed this on Block. He was talking about there's only one thing in the white paper. No, there's two. It's decentralized governance, and that's what sets Bitcoin apart from all the other crypto. Is that it has decentralized digital transactions, no intermediary, and it has decentralized governance. That's why it's a commodity. That's why it doesn't pass the Howey test, and ETH passes the Howey test on all four of those because it doesn't have decentralized governance. And the SEC is considering of treating ETH like a commodity. This is wrong. I've already written a comment on there. And the reason why I bring this up is because I would love to, if they go through with this, I would like to file a suit against the SEC. Problem is I'm not a lawyer. I need a lawyer that's in the District of Columbia that can file. I'd be happy to do the heavy lifting of writing these arguments. But if there's any lawyers in DC, contact me or DM me or go to solstin.com and you can contact me there.
It's super interesting because you gave me that paper also beforehand, and it lines out like the John Nash is like a cryptographer. But one thing that is super interesting also that you wrote about the Big Bang project and all those things that might point to him actually being Satoshi Nakamoto. And then there's like this question of like if he understood the implications of that and the importance of doing that, he probably also understood that he needs to have it to himself and not put his face and his name to there.
Well, yeah, I mean, those are three topics you just covered. First of all, he understood how important it was. First of all, this Keynesianism was destroying his Nash equilibrium, right? It was a threat to Nash equilibrium is just the mathematics between supply and demand. So it's this Adam Smith wealth of nations, and Adam Smith called it the invisible hand. And here comes Nash, creates a finite Nash equilibrium, does the math, and so it's no longer invisible hand, it's Nash equilibrium. And after you do the exchange, everyone can share the utility of those exchanges. So that's Nash equilibrium. But get back to the cryptography. Well, so I want to bring this up. He wrote in 1955 when he was at Rand, he was warning the NSA. He wrote them a letter, and he was talking about a trap door. And I'm like, what is a trap door? It's basically a one-way algorithm where you can create it in one direction easily, but going back is difficult. I mean, we understand that, that's a hash now. But he was describing that the trap door to the NSA. And then he went on to say that, there's a real danger that secure cipher systems might be devised by someone and that such a system might be unbreakable. Well, he was warning against Bitcoin. He was saying somebody might do this. And it turns out, I believe he went ahead and did just that. And this work was declassified in 2012. This letter that went directly to the NSA from Nash, who really understood fundamentally this public and private key, not to that level, but he understood it 20 years before that RSA came out. So yeah, in terms of cryptography, he was ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I got a lot of because I looked at the comments, and some of them said like, "Oh, could he even like write C++? Could he even write code? And was it even good in software engineering?" A lot of those questions came up, and I think in the last episode we did on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's a lot of programmers out there. They say, "Oh, I've been schooled in programming," and it's like, well, and what else do you do? If you don't have anything else to do, I mean, you're like an empty vassal. And so computer programming is great, but you also need to be an expert in something else. And Nash, what he did is 1983, he was going down to every day he was going down to the computer lab, and that's what he was doing for what he called his occupational therapy. And in other words, it helped him start to reason again and get his faculties back. So he was down there every day in the computer and just programming. And there's also reports of he would be talking to someone and he would just kind of disappear for several days, and he'd come back with reams of paper and saying, this is a way we can do that. And it's not just a way we can do this, but he would do it that would last, 1,000 years. I mean, it was like one of those things where he would just take it to an extreme. He really liked doing that. And so he was credited for being very talented to programming. And it's not about programming. He was a great thinker. And so do you have to be a good programmer to be able to think? No, he was a great thinker. And because of that, he was credited for writing good software. But and he did, there was some exposure to C++. But what's more interesting than that is, in his dissertation, non-cooperative games, he illustrates it with poker at the very end. And at the very beginning of Bitcoin code, the first release, there was poker stuff in there. So, there's strong Nash Nakamoto connections. And this guy was very much a lone genius in all the work that he did. And so for him to be a lone genius in writing software, it's really not a change in his lifestyle.
The first time I ever made any money, I got myself from that money a watch. And ever since then, I collect timepieces to remember times where I achieved some milestone. That's why I got the Bitcoin 2025 edition when I went to my first ever American Bitcoin conference. So for me, the Bitcoin watches from CoinVigilante represents the time that we are living in. For every person that wears a Bitcoin watch, I know they are representing sound money to the outside world. Make sure to check out those amazing CoinVigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. I know how big of a hurdle it can be to have self-custody, but it's so freaking important to make that first step. We have to make sure it's as easy and simple as possible. And that's exactly what BitBox did. BitBox created the simplest and the easiest hardware wallet to use to get into self-custody. So get yourself a BitBox down from the link in the description. And when you use code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. Yeah, also this was my kind of response. Always like I wasn't aware that he actually was every day in a computer lab and did the work. But even if that wouldn't be the case, a guy with his understanding and his intellect, he can figure out how to code. This is not the hard part of getting Bitcoin up and running.
So even after his recovery, Shapley was somebody that he knew way back in Princeton, and they weren't buddy, but they respected each other as mathematicians. And there was a great deal of respect between the two. And Shapley visited with him after his recovery and asked him what he was doing. He goes, he's working on software, and he called it the Big Bang. And Shapley actually referenced, hey, I saw, and publicly said, yeah, he's working on some software called the Big Bang, and I wish him the best. And, by this time, Shapley had moved up at some, high level, some university, and his career was amazing. And so that was, the way he described it, it's eerily close to what Bitcoin could be. It could be the Big Bang.
What was he describing? Is that just something like is there like some writing or from Shapley that you know of? Like how did he describe the Big Bang project?
Well, keep in mind that reference that I got on the Big Bang that he told Shapley comes out of a book, A Beautiful Mind, which the movie was based on that, right? And at that time, Bitcoin didn't exist when that book was written, right? So how do you make the connection that the Big Bang is going to become Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin, the word didn't even exist. So is Bitcoin a Big Bang? I would say by every measure, yes.
It's probably the biggest bang, especially in financial history. That's super interesting when we think about all those things. Is there? How can we go ahead about that? But it's for me when we think about the John Nash is Satoshi Nakamoto, then we can also entertain the implications of that, because we already talked about like, okay, the implications of what if ideal money comes to us, but then also like, what are the implications of if John Nash is Satoshi Nakamoto? Does this change how we look at the origin of Bitcoin? Does this like has anything to do with Bitcoin at this point, especially because John Nash is dead? So like it's I have sometimes problems if people say someone is Satoshi Nakamoto if this person is alive and this person says no to it, then it's like you point basically attack vectors and someone to him, and so like with John Nash being in that, I think I don't have a problem with that at all. And so it's interesting what the implications are if John Nash actually is Satoshi Nakamoto.
Well, let's look at the pedigree. I mean, what are the implications? I mean, for John Nash, who had to take a course from Bert Hoslitz and he had to do all these calculations and, try to understand the value of, like, for example, Germany might have an excess of knives and England might have an excess of textiles. And how do you have a standard measurement of value between those two different commodities? And what if we have an excess of corn here in the United States? So how do we find parity? How do we find this equilibrium? And it's much more difficult when you have different currencies. As you know, nobody would argue, as it was written in 1928, nobody would argue that every single state in the United States should have a different currency. It's just a lot better. And it would have been a lot easier for John Nash to figure out these things without, if they had one currency across two different international nation states, it would have made those problems that were given to him from Bert Hoslitz a lot easier. So for him, it was hey, this is obvious. This made, finding parity and finding equilibrium for these international trade agreements a lot easier. And so that's the first implication from John Nash. And so this was a lifelong pursuit on John Nash's. How do we achieve one currency in the world? And it turns out you can't work cooperatively on this because those powers are not going to give it up. And so you really have to play a game theory. You have to play non-cooperative games. And so this was a lifelong pursuit that was already put into motion at the University of Chicago, taught to him in Carnegie. And then he took it to Princeton and wrote non-cooperative games. Nash equilibrium is just finite. But when a Nobel Prize committee member came and interviewed him to see if he was, stable enough to be able to handle this this award, this Nobel Prize, he asked him if he was going to be looking, for in his future studies about irrational actors, and Nash replied. He says, he wanted to work on an immortal Nash equilibrium, not finite, infinite. And this has implications for us as Bitcoiners. What is the narrative? Well, if you believe Nash was the creator of Bitcoin, you believe we're heading towards ideal money, and that Bitcoin is an emerging Bitcoin equilibrium. We will have a standard measurement of value. We're going to make international trade a lot easier. Long-term contracts are going to be a lot more stable. Supply chain is going to be far more efficient. And so that Bitcoin equilibrium, really, that emerging Bitcoin equilibrium, is what he told that committee member from the Nobel Prize committee. He wanted to work on an immortal Nash equilibrium. And Bitcoin is that. Bitcoin is emerging to become an immortal Nash equilibrium.
How do you actually look at other candidates for Satoshi Nakamoto when we look at Adam Back, Nick Szabo, Hal Finney? I even heard Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. So that there's so many different theories out there. For me personally, the John Nash one makes the most sense. It's like the best one for me. But how do you look at like other theories?
I think, like, if you go out and talk to AI or ChatGPT or some of these others and say who has the most connections with Nakamoto, and I think Nick Szabo is, the leader in that. But if you really look at all the connections that Nash and Nakamoto have, they're far more than what Szabo has. And Nick Szabo, brilliant guy. I mean, amazing human being in many respects. And but he produced, let's say, in BitGold, fragments that could, let's say, translate into Bitcoin. But let's compare Nash and Szabo. Nash laid out a blueprint for Bitcoin. When you study these Nash Nakamoto connections, the game theory, non-cooperative games, the economics, this is a blueprint for ideal money. It is. I mean, that was his lifetime pursuit. And so what really points to the creator of Bitcoin? Fragments of code or the blueprint for Bitcoin? The big picture. And Nash had that big picture.
One guy, I just read the comment, said also not true because John Nash is not Adam Back, and I've one because I truly believe Adam Back is not Satoshi Nakamoto, and there's like one very, very simple reason for that, because Adam Back is in the white paper, and Satoshi Nakamoto would never go through all this trouble to be not known and then write his own name into the white paper. Like that sounds so irrational to me.
Yeah, I mean, people look at Nakamoto and they think, oh, what a cool guy. Let's wear a hoodie and swing a samurai sword around, and I'm Satoshi Nakamoto. This is a person who had elite education. Okay, a person who was that good at cryptography, programming, economics. This was not a young kid, a dropout person that decided to save the world. This is a person who had an amazing broad education and super talented. And I believe it was one person, because if you had more people involved, we would know who it is for sure, without a doubt. You just can't keep secrets like this. But Robin, you know what? I want to jump ahead on this one topic. This is a guy named John Golson, who I follow on Twitter, and he loves to tweet about Nash a little bit broader than I do. I mean, he likes to cover many aspects of Nash. And John Golson really understands the mathematics in a powerful way. And recently he came up with another, and I wrote about 18 Nash Nakamoto connections, and he came up with another one. And I've been documenting. If you go to like Solstin.com, John Nash, I have about 70 references because the people couldn't follow them in my book. The URLs were just way too long. So I was requested to put it on a page, so I did. So you can follow the links and just, I mean, rather than buy the book, just go there and read all the references, and you'll really get the feel of these Nash Nakamoto connections. And then in addition to that, at the very bottom, whenever another strong Nash Nakamoto connection comes up, I document it at the very bottom, and with the intent of writing, Satoshi's Mentor book, like maybe in 2 years from now. Hopefully I'll have some time to do that. But I documented that recently from John Golson, and basically, just hang with me on this. It's really good. It was an unpublished paper by Nash, but it says a logical system cannot effectively state its own consistency. This relates to the incompleteness originally found by Gödel. But one logical system can easily state the formal consistency of another system. We use this idea this is John Nash speaking, in an unpublished paper. We use this idea in creating our hierarchy of levels so that on a higher level, it is possible, in effect, to assume the validity and consistency of proceedings possible on lower levels. I mean, isn't that Bitcoin? I mean, if you really look at the Merkle tree, and also, well, it's not really the Merkle tree, it's the previous blocks. And so you don't have to go back and do proof of work on all those old transactions. You just need a hash, and that's going to show you the congruency. So this is something that, Nash is what he called hierarchical introspective logics. And he wrote this somewhere in between, probably around Fermat's last theorem proof, which was around 1993 or thereafter. But, somewhere in the mid 1990s. And then, the white paper was in 2008, came out. I mean, this is a very strong Nash Nakamoto connection. And it was John Golson who found this. I documented that. And, because Bitcoin is a self-referential system. How can it, another system, how do you get away from that third party? How do you get away from some external reference validating these other systems? Well, he did that, and it's through the random miners. They're the ones that are doing the work, and then other nodes are validating that as they're going forward, and then they can kind of forget about it as they go forward. And all we have to worry about is the next few blocks, and all that other, lower level, all that past, we can know it's valid because way back whenever they validated it. And that's really the secret. As we all know, the miners are the secret sauce of enabling these transactions without third parties.
There was another comment, a little bit not so nice, but I think it's an interesting topic to talk about. He wrote, "If true, you guys are assholes for talking about it. It's better for it to be unknown." I have to, like, if John Nash would be alive, I get the point. You don't want to say he is Satoshi Nakamoto, especially if he's thing. But is there something to it where Bitcoin benefits if we just don't know who he actually was?
No, that's not true. The narrative would become very clean if people understood Nash's, the original intent. A lot of this alt narrative would just be obliterated. That's false. That we need him dead, or excuse me, out of the way. But the other thing is calling me an asshole because I'm talking about it. Because it's going to, cause harm to Satoshi Nakamoto, or because he didn't want to be ever known. That's not true. I believe with Bitcoin being, let's say, internationally accepted now, and it's no longer considered subversive. And when he rolled it out, it was very much a subversive system. And that also tied in with his 25 years of paranoid schizophrenia. And so, yeah, he didn't want to be known. He didn't want to. He would have. He cared very dearly about the respect of his mathematician and his academic friends, but he didn't really care about the respect of just general people. And that I believe that was kind of his coping mechanism, his way to get through a beautiful mind, because he became so famous, and a lot of people only focused on his illness, where his mathematic and economic colleagues treated him with respect for what he accomplished. And so, yeah, he didn't want to deal with that. But now that Satoshi Nakamoto is turning into a hero, I believe that John Nash would have come out of the woodwork. He would have come out of the shadows and would have claimed, this crown. I don't think it was, a lot of it had to do not being this cool kid in a hoodie, working on a laptop. By the way, laptops weren't all that available back then. Before 2008, it was workstations, okay, not laptops. He wasn't a hoodie guy. He was a respected professor at an elite university. He wasn't a dropout. And he rolled out a subversive software program that could have damaged his career. And yeah, we know what happened to other Satoshi Nakamotos that were uncovered and how the media went after them and ruined these people's lives. But when Bitcoin becomes successful, yeah, I think John Nash would have come out of the woodwork. He would have said, yeah, this was the original intent. This is, and I think he would have had that, those million coins, and I think he would have spent some of them. But the problem is the fact is John Nash died in 2015. And who could hold 1 million Bitcoin and not spend just a little bit? That's pretty strong proof that he's out of the picture. It's another strong Nash Nakamoto connection that more than likely Satoshi Nakamoto is not with us anymore.
I also think so. It's very high. The million Bitcoin is interesting because I have also that theory that when he created Bitcoin and he made it first 1 million Bitcoin, that he intentionally just threw away the key, saying this is the first million Bitcoin, we will not touch them. Those are this is the foundation, and it's possible to just maybe he mined the next coming years on a wallet that we don't know that actually is Satoshi Nakamoto, and he could have easily got hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin otherwise also. But it's interesting because I have a very hard time believing that Satoshi Nakamoto is still with us. The discipline would be unhuman to not claim it, to not spend the Bitcoin if the key is still there, because there's a possibility that he just threw away the keys to make that million Bitcoin not move no matter what, which also is a little bit unhuman if you know what Bitcoin will become and what that 1 million Bitcoin could be worth one day and then just throw it away. But also not claiming credit is kind of unhuman. It's super interesting. I like that theory.
Yeah, and keep in mind, John Nash was not a super wealthy guy. He did come from, let's say, a very comfortable upbringing. His father was an electrical engineer. But John Nash had 2 sons, and both sons suffered from schizophrenia also. And so financially, John Nash wasn't in the best situation after his 25 years of illness, and he had many family needs. And so, this idea that he would never ever spend just a little bit, that just doesn't make sense to me. I think eventually he would have spent some of it for his family needs. But that changed when he and his wife died in a taxi car accident coming home from the airport back to New Jersey after winning another award for his amazing work throughout his life.
One thing, one brought also up. I tried to search it, but I remember it because I think I read it an hour ago, something like that, where someone was saying he used the London Times headline in a Genesis blog, and some of his writing was also British. And John Nash is American. How do you look at that? Is that kind of just a confusion tactic, maybe even?
Yeah, his writings were for the most part very technical, concise. It wasn't really his writing style. He wasn't, like Satoshi says, he wasn't a good writer, and we know John Nash really wasn't a good writer either in his lifetime. He was an amazing mathematician. He's abstract mathematics. Now, the word color, for example, was English spelling. But keep in mind, he was exposed to this when he went to Europe during his illness. So he was over there in Europe trying to do whatever he was trying to do. He was trying to build this one world coalition, which he attributes to part of his illness. And he was doing some pretty crazy stuff at the time. But I do recall him also going up to England. So yeah, he was exposed to English. Or British English.
Yeah, one also wrote, I have come to the conclusion that Dorian Nakamoto is likely the creator of Bitcoin.
I didn't follow that. Say that again, please.
Someone wrote that his conclusion is that Dorian Nakamoto is creator, like the creator of Bitcoin. The guy that is always used as Satoshi Nakamoto's face. I find it very highly unlikely. Again, with the name, like who would just change from?
Well, Dorian Nakamoto and his family greatly. I think it was a Time magazine that outed him. And his family was just hounded by the media, and it was just ruined. In fact, this was the last time that I forget what year it was that John Nash got on his or he posted somewhere publicly that he says, "I am not Dorian," blah blah blah. That was what was it? Year was that? 2014.
Dorian Nakamoto.
Yeah, when Nash got on, made a public statement, typed it out, says, "I am not Dorian." I think that was in 2014, and then that was the very last communication ever. And then, John Nash dies in 2015. So again, that's another strong Nash Nakamoto connection.
Wait, John Nash wrote publicly that he's not Dorian?
Yeah, that's on my website. I can easily find that. Just do a quick query. I am not Dorian. See what happens. Oh, it's not found. I didn't put that down as a reference. I do know that I strongly recall that it was 2014 that he wrote, "I am not Dorian," blah, blah, blah. And that was 2014. And that was the last public communication by Satoshi Nakamoto.
Oh, Satoshi Nakamoto wrote that.
Yeah, was I saying John Nash? Excuse me. To me, it's interchangeable. It was Satoshi Nakamoto that wrote. That was his last public statement, and that was in the year. I'm very confident of this. I could be wrong, but I'm confident. 2014, and Nash died in 2015.
That's crazy. Also, kudos to Satoshi Nakamoto of saying that, because it gets the burden of Dorian Nakamoto and his family. It's obviously that's not the case. Imagine now someone being accused of being the creator of Bitcoin, and the mainstream media is just getting onto you, and you're just like, "Oh, I'm not it." But how can you proof that you haven't invented something. Like it's so, or like if people believe that, it's almost hard to say like, oh, I wasn't it, because the more proof you bring up, the more people are like, yeah, of course you want to cover your traps.
Yeah, the media is nasty. It's a cacophony of just crazy noise. I mean, we know how Twitter can get once in a while, and so you get a little dose of that, and that multiply that 10 times, and we know what these people can suffer from having that kind of media attention.
Really cool. I have one question that I asked each and every one of my guests and my returning guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you? The question is, what have you learned outside of Bitcoin since your last appearance?
Wow. Well, I would say some friendships are better kept as memories. That's probably one of my life lessons I've learned recently.
Nice. That's a nice one.
Yeah.
Really cool. We have Antonin in the podcast, as you know, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, which country will first adopt a real Bitcoin standard?
Which country?
Yeah, which country or which region?
Well, what do you mean by a Bitcoin standard? I'm not really clear what that means.
Yeah, that's the only problem with those questions, because the question comes from the previous guest and he did not define real Bitcoin standard, but I talked with him a little bit and he says that what El Salvador has right now, that's not a real Bitcoin standard. So I guess he's saying like, when is the point coming where Bitcoin is the standard unit of account in the country? Because it will not be the same on the whole world. There will be
unit of account is going to be one of the last stages of our journey towards ideal money. I mean, store of value it's already here. Medium of exchange, I think, is going to be the next big step, and then unit of account is way down the road. So let's say which one is going to use it as a medium of exchange as the Bitcoin standard. Well, El Salvador is, I was buying stuff in El Salvador, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago when I was down there. So that works with Lightning Network. As a unit of account, I think that's more of it's just going to take time. It's not a matter of where. It's as a unit of account, I think we're decades away from that. Medium of exchange, it's already happening. So.
And there's a small part in El Salvador, Berlin, that has already kind of shops and stores where they actually write out the prices in Satoshi only and no longer in US dollar, which is fun to see. But yeah, Berlin is a very small mountain village.
Yeah. Really it cool. Works. The only reason why we can't use it as a medium of exchange in the United States with our Lightning Network app on our phone is because we have capital gains. Get rid of that, where we can use up to $200. People will start using it here. It's easy. I mean, you just scan a little QR code and it happens in about 1 second or less.
Yeah, capital gains tax is a big reason why people don't do it. And probably the one major reason why people don't adopt it as a medium exchange. But yeah, let's see how this development goes. Thank you so much, Bryan, for being on the podcast. I know last time around people really enjoyed the theory and enjoyed the podcast overall. We answered hopefully a few of the more critical questions today, and we got a little bit of a deeper look into the theory and John Nash. So thank you so much for being on. Before I let you go, where can people get in touch with you and maybe ask you directly questions?
Yeah, you can DM me on Twitter or just go to solstin.com, and I have a contact page that goes directly to my iPhone. So that's, solstin.com is solstin.com is probably an easiest way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bryan, for being on. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. this content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.